in the house. Let me hear your bars. Let me see you bite. Let me see your scars. You know what we about. Come see us in the yard. This is war. Go to rip a heart. Dogs in the house. 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 Dogs in the house.
Hello and welcome to the third or fourth most mediocre Husky football podcast on the internet. We are all we hear is purple. I'm Andrew Berg, and our panel today, Coach B. Coach, how are you doing this week?
Fantastic. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Luke Kemper back this week. Luke, how are you today?
Oh, living the dream all day, every
The
day.
dream has made it from last week to this week. That's outstanding. Part of that dream was Washington remaining perfect, a 30-9 win over Eastern Michigan. It was a lot in broad strokes like week one. It was the win over Weber State, a little bit slow out of the gates, wore them down, eventually kind of made it comfortable in the second half. This one looked a lot the same. There were drop passes and bad penalties, a drop punt, some stagnant drives early on. Coach, what do you think has been the cause to this poor execution coming out of the gates in the first two games so far?
Yeah, I was trying to pinpoint exactly what might be the root cause. I know I've seen some speculation about, hey, maybe part of it is, the scripted plays, just aren't quite there yet. And the game planning, we're maybe a step behind in our scripting, but that doesn't really explain all of the other phases of the game, right? That didn't quite look as sharp as we'd like it to be. And so kind of where I've landed is I think this is just a byproduct of all of the turnover, all of the new faces, the new staff, the new players, and we're just not fully in sync yet. We're not comfortable holistically in each phase of the game with all of the players that are playing on each unit with each other. And it's a little bit of the opposite of what we saw last year, where we had a super experienced team with lots of veterans that, generally speaking, started off a little bit hotter than at least what we've seen over the last 2 weeks this year.
Yeah, Luke, do you have any insight on this? Like, what do you think has been going on? It looked a little bit different this week. I think in the first week, the slow start had a lot to do with things just didn't quite click. Like we weren't getting the first downs, weren't finishing drives. And this week it was like very obvious mistakes, like the sideline warning or the penalty for a sideline encroachment is just really very easily preventable play, and a couple of very simple drop passes. You think this is just kind of random coincidence or nerves or something like that happening?
I think Coach hit pretty well on the head when he was talking about the scripted plays. I believe on the first drive, which was a 3 and out, it was 3 straight passes. So no Jonah Coleman runs to take the pressure off of Rodgers at all. So it's 3 pressure throws right away for him, for a guy who in the first game admittedly looked a little off. He had a good completion percentage in the first game, but I think we all agree that something was just like a hair off. Throws were maybe a little behind, and it started off a little off again in this game as well. So I think that might have contributed to it. So it's shaking his confidence perhaps a little early, and the way that Eastern Michigan was able to move so well on their first drive didn't exactly calm the nerves of anyone in the stadium,
Yeah.
let alone the team. So I think nerves probably had a good deal to do with it. And then everything really turned around when we forced that fumble, and pretty much the team gained that confidence right afterwards when they converted on that 4th down. And it was pretty smooth sailing from there.
Yeah, it was, and I think that was a turning point. I made a note of that as well. The pass to Giles Jackson, which honestly, anytime the ball goes in the air on a 4th and short, it makes me a little bit nervous. But that was about as low risk as it gets, and perfectly designed play for the situation. Although, if Eastern Michigan was paying attention, they would know we're not going to run to the left. We've pretty much established already we're not running to the left. So the play action left, and then Giles Jackson peeling out to the right. And then you had the long touchdown pass to DeGraff down the right sideline for his second long touchdown in 2 games. The long run by Jonah Coleman. And I will say, watching that play, I thought I was watching the reincarnation of Maurice Jones-Drew, like the choppy little steps and the wide body with guys bouncing off of him, but still getting up to a pretty good speed. And then Rodgers hit Denzel Boston on a shorter throw, but nice little post on the left side into the end zone, where one of the first throws this year where Rodgers has kind of trusted his receiver to win against reasonably good coverage, and it worked really well. I thought those were both really nice throws by Rodgers, and he had a better game overall. It wasn't just the completion percentage, which was almost identical week over week, but more accuracy on deep balls. He was making more difficult throws. He was standing in a little bit better against pressure. Coach, how did week 2 Will Rogers compare to week 1 in your mind? Was it noticeably different, or was it basically the same?
I think where I've kind of landed on that is it's about the same. Like if you really went back and looked at every single one of his throws and the situations and all that, as I've kind of had to do with film study a little bit, and then comparing that to week 1 versus week 2, I think it's all the same Will Rogers, and we're just asking him to do certain things a little bit differently, and kind of better feeling out what he's comfortable with. Kind of to what Luke had said a little bit earlier, where right out of the gates, 3 straight passes, not super comfortable. I kind of noticed something on film study this week too, if you had read it, where he's not as comfortable, it seems, with all the under center, heavy play action, taking his eyes off of the defense, turning around with the fake, and then getting his eyes back around, reassessing what's going on. He seemed a lot more confident and able to play within rhythm when he's in shotgun, when he can see the whole field, never has to take his eyes off of it and can just sling it, right? If you look at that play to DeGraff for the touchdown, it's a straightforward play. He's out of shotgun. He just drops the ball right in the bucket exactly where it needs to go, and that looked great. He had an earlier play action. I think it was the beginning of – it was right after the fumble recovery that we got. It was a quick play action where it was under center. It was hard play action, but it was just a turnaround, and then he knew immediately rip it to Denzel Boston over the middle, where it was really just a 2-man route concept, Yankee, and he knew exactly where to go with the ball. And if it wasn't there, then just got to throw it away. So it feels like we're starting to kind of figure out what he likes, what he doesn't like, and let him play to his strengths.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think that's very true, to find things that Rodgers likes doing and do those things within the overall offensive concept, and not just Rodgers, but other players as well. And I think often that just falls under the broad heading of chemistry. Like when the receiver and the quarterback both know what each other like and are able to make those things work together, that's when players have good chemistry together. And it was, 1 week, but I'd also give a shout out to Jeremiah Hunter, who was the leading receiver after a quiet week 1, where people were kind of asking, like, where is this guy? I'm sure some of that was just intentionally finding opportunities for him. And then some of it was him getting more comfortable in the offense, getting more comfortable with Rodgers and the rest of his teammates. So nice turnaround for him. Kaleki Latu soaked up a ton of snaps as the tight end. He played like 50 some snaps. We talked last week about the lack of depth at the tight end position. Obviously, the whole running back rotation of Coleman, Davis, Muhammad all look really, really good. I think any of those 3 you could argue should be getting 10 plus carries in a game. Obviously Coleman, but even his backups, you would feel pretty good about them getting a heavier load. Luke, was there anybody else offensively who really stood out to you, or guys who are you're excited about so far this season on the offense?
Well, I also, before I mention anyone else, I wanted to say that post to Denzel Boston was I think easily Rodgers' best throw of the season. I mean, that was just excellent. He threw it down a little down, but in a perfect spot where only where only Boston could catch that ball. That defender had no chance at even getting a sniff of that. So I mean, I just want to give credit where credit's due on that excellent throw. But as far as the offense, I mean, I just it's the unsung heroes of the offensive line. That right side, like you mentioned, when we ran right, good things happened. So as a party, is holding it down at right tackle. I don't believe I saw him move over to left tackle this game. I could have missed that, but also the Mahi on the right side, on the right guard is. I think he's consistently been one of the better players and definitely the most underappreciated players on the offense so far. I think he might be the only offensive lineman without a penalty so far. Don't quote me on that either.
But yeah, he has been rock solid, and I think being a really good, consistent guard is a recipe for being underrated, most likely. Um, I want to talk about the defense a little bit too. Almost a little bit of an afterthought, despite being really, really successful so far this year. 12 points given up in 2 games, no touchdowns so far. This game, the thing, if you're going to focus on one piece, would be the pressure, putting the quarterback under Snyder under constant pressure. Zach Durfee led the way with 2.5 sacks. Fish mentioned after the game he also wants to focus on getting pressure up the middle with the defensive tackles. I still have to say I'm not entirely sold on the defense. I'm the stats are great, but Coach, what is your read on the defense so far? It seems like there's opportunities to gain yardage against them here and there, and the fact that they haven't given up a touchdown so far, it seems almost lucky. Am I off base with that, or what's your assessment of this defense so far, both schematically and the results?
I I think you're kind of right, where it's a little bit luck, a little bit I guess maybe luck of the draw as far as who we've played so far on the schedule and strength of opponents. Um if we had played similarly against maybe back to back group of five teams or maybe a non-conference, power five opponent, um we probably would have given up a touchdown at this point and probably not have had as good advanced stat metrics, whatever, that, is saying that we're a really, really good defense. It's not to say that we aren't, but I think we are erring more on the side of a bend but don't break defense rather than a truly shut down, soul sucking kind of defense like a Georgia of in recent years, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
I think a major difference in that is probably our, I guess, small sample size, but relatively low turnover rates. As far as maybe turnover
Yeah.
worthy rates on what we're winning on the defensive side, and then I mean it's kind of tough to complain after this past week's performance, but comparatively speaking, it feels like we're not making as many impact plays in the offensive backfield as we probably should relative to our level of competition that we're playing against. Um, and that we're not really, it doesn't feel like we're all that stout, especially against the run game, which is something that's been a persistent issue at UW for several years now.
Yeah, and I think that's a good way to summarize it or to diagnose the root cause of the issue, which is we really don't have a lot of strength up the middle. And that's where you would get those run stuffing plays, or at least you'd have those interior defensive linemen occupying blockers to allow the linebackers to make plays in the backfield or to just make plays at the line of scrimmage. We haven't seen a lot of that in the run game so far. Maybe it can happen, but it does seem like as we get into higher levels of competition, the fact that there's been kind of a fair amount of room to run for 3, 4, 5 yard gains by a MAC team and an FCS team makes me a little bit worried about when we get into the Rutgers and Iowa, the kind of these games where teams are going to want to run the ball on us and sustain 12 play drives with 5-yard carries. It seems like that may be an opportunity for them. One other thing that was notable here, the secondary did make more plays in this game. They also committed a lot of penalties. It wasn't just the secondary, but there were 100 yards of penalties in the game. Some were very avoidable, like Bandy's jumping on the pile after the fumble. Carson Bruner with the late hit, like milliseconds after the quarterback started to slide. The sideline offense. Luke, what do you think about the rash of penalties we saw in this game? Is this something you're concerned about? Do you think it's demonstrating a lack of discipline, or do you think this is just kind of a random, this game had a lot of penalties and it's not part of what's going to be a trend for the team over the season?
I don't think there's a blanket statement that you can really make about the penalties. I will say though that especially that Bruner one, seeing that in real time and then the replay on the big board, there is no chance that was a late hit. I mean, nobody was buying that one. And so I do think that there was probably an excess of penalties called for that game, not just on UW side, but also on Eastern Michigan side. But a couple of repeat offenders, you mentioned Bandis, he picked up an unnecessary 15-yarder first game as well, and now the second game. So it is a little discouraging to see that pattern developing for someone who we're hoping can be a big contributor on this defensive line and this defensive unit as a whole. So it's a little discouraging for him. And Prysock, again, the guy who I expected to be the true lockdown corner of the secondary, picked up another pass interference in week 2. I admittedly didn't agree with the first one from week 1, but I think he had 2 penalties in this past game. But for someone who you expect to play at an exceptionally high level to pick up penalties, it's not something that you really associate one with the other. So it's been a little disillusioning in that regard. But overall, I don't think that it is a team discipline issue or playing sloppy. It can get a little sloppy in the moment and emotions run high. But overall, I would say I'm not worried. I think that the coaching staff knows how to rein this one in.
I will say for Prysock there, I think that's just part of his style of play. And while I think we all had expectations that he would obviously come in and be our number 1 corner and have a lockdown ability, I think something worth mentioning is it was partially due to the fact that he was so tall and athletic and would be able to play that particular style of physical, aggressive coverage that just naturally draws more attention and penalties. I mean, we Seahawks fans from the Legion of Boom era recognize that, where at a certain point, if that's your style and that's super effective, you're likely to have a little bit more of those types of penalties. But it does also allow you to play that style of defense. So you kind of have to take the pros and the cons all the same. So it doesn't really bother me quite as much, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, that's a good point, Coach, because Prysock has been going up against 2 bigger body receivers all camp long in Boston and Hunter. I mean, those guys are definitely possession receivers who play big and play physical when they're trying to catch the ball. And I think my expectation was so high with Prysock because he'd been so good at shutting them down during camp that he's probably carried over a lot of that physicality and mindset over into these receivers who can't match our receivers so far in terms of playing style.
Yeah.
One other thing I noticed from this game, was how it felt like it went by, especially the second half. Like almost like very little happened in the second half. There was the first Husky drive with the touchdown pass to Jeremiah Hunter, which was a nice drive. But there was a 12-play, 6-minute drive by the Huskies that ended in a field goal, followed by a 15-play, almost 8-minute drive by Eastern Michigan that ended in a field goal. Eastern had 11-play, 6-minute drive, 10-play, 4-minute drive, 11-play, 5-minute drive in the first half. It was extremely long possessions. And I mean, we talked about already the bend but don't break philosophy and how it ultimately worked pretty well in this game. And I think cumulatively, those 4 extremely long drives were worth 9 points. So it's not like we're getting torched defensively, but it made the game have a very weird flow to it where it felt like the other team had the ball all the time. And like the Husky offense, I think ran 57 total plays, which was a talking point after the game because there just weren't that many carries to go around for the running backs. And hopefully the defense could get off the field a little faster in subsequent games, and that can allow the offense to just do a little bit more, just be on the field a little bit more. We'll see how that plays out over the next couple of weeks, but that would be just a little thing. And maybe ultimately time of possession isn't the most important thing, but as a viewer, it felt like the Huskies just didn't have the ball very much. Maybe that's just my opinion. Coach, what is your opinion on kind of the time of possession situation from a coaching perspective? Is it something you care about, or is it just kind of like the ends justify the means and we don't really care how we got to a 3-touchdown win?
Yeah. My personal opinion, just having coached at some level for some period of time, and seeing that it does make a difference, especially as far as fatigue over the course of the entire game, depending on if your defense is just constantly out there, they're going to get gassed. But I really view it more so as an ends justify the means and a matter more so of efficiency. If you're able to finish more drives with points than your opponent, if you're able to finish more possessions with touchdowns and field goals, right? Then I guess it doesn't matter if it takes 1 play or 10 plays. At the end of the day, if you are, the points per drive is better, then you're going to come out with the win. But it does matter. It's an end justify the means to a certain extent.
It is. It's just a weird anomaly. I think you don't usually see a game where a team wins the time of possession battle by rushing for 2 yards a carry and getting 204 total yards in the game. It's just a strange outcome for Eastern. But let's finish up this part of the conversation. We've got an exciting Apple Cup coming up. So stick around and we'll be right back. Thanks for sticking with us. Let's talk a little bit about Washington State coming into town this weekend. Before we get into the X's and O's of the game, we were talking a little bit before we started recording about the strangeness about the game being at Lumen Field instead of either Martin Stadium or Husky Stadium. We talked about the ticket prices, the potential attendance. Luke, how are you feeling about, the what the tickets were originally listed at, how they've come down now, and what do you think is going to be, what the crowd is going to be like for this game?
Well, when the ticket prices first came out, I balked right away. I was like, whoa, you want how much for comparable seats to where I would be in Husky Stadium? Yeah, I guess I'm not going to the Apple Cup this year. And then I mentioned before we started recording, I happened to look online, and I think it's the 7th row, 50-yard line behind the Husky bench. They were going for 170 a ticket now. I mean, the prices have just gone so far down. I believe I saw when ticket sales were first available, UW's allocation was around 17,000 or like 18,000, somewhere in that range, and Wazoo's was 1,700. Just the disparity was going to be evident right away from the immediate allocation that it's probably going to be mostly Husky fans in the stadium from a ticket split standpoint and attendance standpoint. I would guess right now they've only sold about half the seats, so I think those ticket prices could continue to come down. So if you're in the area and you want to go see the Apple Cup, you could be getting a pretty good deal.
Yeah, I am a little bit worried just about how it shows up on TV if there's nobody at the game, if the stadium really is half full, or there's 20,000 empty seats in the stadium. It's going to be outdrawn by a mediocre regular season Sounders game or something. I hope we avoid that. But little to do to control that at this point, other than learn the lesson from it, make the tickets a little bit cheaper, and try to make up for the prices in volume next time around, hopefully. But on the field, this is going to be a really different WSU team than what we've been seeing the last few years. Obviously, they've moved a little bit away from the air raid. John Mateer is the quarterback. He's very much a run-first quarterback. He has only 36 pass attempts in 2 games. When I saw that number, it seemed wrong to me. It's like Gardner Minshew had, I feel like, 36 pass attempts in the first half of some of his games in the Mike Leach era. Mateer's also, he rushed for 197 yards on 21 carries last week against Texas Tech, who's not a good team, although they are an FBS par 4 team. They're quite weak this year. The running back, Wayshawn Parker, also is averaging almost 9 yards per carry. Coach, we talked about the questions we had with UW's run defense. How are we going to survive against a rushing offense at WSU who's averaging, 8 or 9 yards a carry for most of their primary runners?
Yeah, this is a scenario where I feel like it might come down to efficiency and our offense needing to be more efficient than our opponent's rushing attack is against our relatively porous run defense. And so I am quite worried about the fact that Mateer is the style of quarterback that he is. I think, what is it, over the first 2 games of the season for him, he's 23 carries for 252. That's 11 yards a carry. And he can be a big, a long speed, big play run threat. His long this past week against Texas Tech was 68 yards. He had a 40-yard run in the first game. It'll really come down to, can we stop them on early downs and force him to throw? Because even though he did have a very good stat line against Portland State, he was 11 of 17 for 352 and 5 touchdowns against Portland State. Portland State also got blown out by, I want to say, like 4 scores last week by Weber State. So, it might be a poor kind of secondhand comparison between UW and Wazoo. But there's something there where I'm thinking, hey, if we can get more of the Texas Tech passing game performance from Mateer, where he was 9 of 19 for 115, a touchdown and a pick, force him out of the running situations, force him into passing situations where that'll play to our strengths. That kind of has to be the key, because I also suspect that our high-end performance on offense might not be quite as explosive as Wazoo's high-end potential for offensive performance.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And what you said about forcing Mateer into the passing game obviously is going to be a focus. Even the passes he was completing against Texas Tech were not the prettiest. There were a lot of short stuff, screens, bubble screens. And the touchdown he threw to Kyle Williams was kind of a floater into traffic that got tipped by the defensive back into Williams' hands. So there are turnovers to be had in the passing game, I think, if we can get them there. But there's going to be a lot of plays where they're designed quarterback runs, not even like take one look down the field and run, but designed runs where they line up and use the running back as an extra blocker and get that advantage. So it's got to be trying to get the defensive linemen to hold their blocks and try to push up field a little bit, and then the linebackers being able to bring Mateer down better than the Texas Tech linebackers did, going to be extremely important. I did notice in doing some prep for this game that UW has been just an absolute darling of some of the advanced stats, particularly the expected point added stats. It's the fourth best offense in the country on dropback passes, 16th on rushing success rate, fourth in expected points against passes for the defense. Some of this has to do with the schedule, but Luke, do you think, looking at these stats, does this make you think that maybe this team is a little bit better than we were expecting and what we've seen so far? I think a lot of this conversation has been about areas for improvement, but we are, at least in the coaches poll, ranked 22nd, and these stats seem to indicate that that might be almost underrating the team. How do you react to that?
I think there's a lot of positives to this defense. I mean, I shouted him out last week, and he would deserve yet another one this week. Elijah Jackson has continued to look really good in coverage.
Yeah.
He had that deflection that could have been an interception, and I don't think he has allowed a completion yet this year. He has been so good. So him, along with other really talented members of the secondary, Jordan Shaw, Thaddeus Dixon, Brysock, have all played really well at the corner spot, and at safety, Cam Fab has looked really good. Bruce Sard, I was really impressed with him last week. I mean, he looked strong. He was taking guys down brutally, and they stayed down for a little longer than they probably would have if someone else had tackled them. And obviously, we know how locked down our linebackers can be when they're playing at their best. Bruner and Tuputala are the cornerstones of this defense as a whole, and they're going to be very important for this game. I think that between the two of them, there's probably going to be a lot of spying involved to make sure that we are trying to contain their quarterback as much as possible. But I think that Kamari House could also get quite a bit of run in this game. I mean, I think the defensive rotation is going to have to be pretty frequent when you can get it, just because, like Coach was saying, when teams are really running and taking up that time of possession, defenses can get gassed. Kamari House is a little undersized in the weight department, but he is fast at the linebacker spot. So trying to catch up with quarterbacks who are scrambling away, I think he could add a good dimension that we wouldn't necessarily expect from him.
Yeah, that's a good call. I think anything we can do to get more closing speed from linebackers, that was kind of Mateer just ran past the Texas Tech linebackers. It was almost like they were playing without linebackers in the game. It was like a defensive line, and if he got through that, he was into the secondary. We can't have that. That's absolutely need better play from our linebackers than what they got. And I've actually been fairly happy with Bruner and Tuputala through the first couple of games. At least they're sure tacklers. They're getting to the right places, and those are probably the two most important things in this game. Like, don't bite on fakes, fill the right gaps, and then when you get there, make the tackle. Keep it as simple as possible. The last thing I wanted to talk about, Coach, was this Washington State defense. We mentioned the advanced stats for the UW defense. The advanced stats for the Washington State defense are pretty mediocre considering Jake Dickert's reputation. They're middle of the pack or a little bit worse in pretty much every important stat, especially the success rate stats, meaning we may have a good chance to sustain longer drives against them and do to their defense what was happening to ours last weekend. Have you had any read on the WSU defense so far this year, and what do you think would be the right game plan against what they're putting on the field?
Yeah, I think I hadn't actually taken a look at the specific stats, but in kind of having watched most of the Wazoo Texas Tech game, and then seeing bits and pieces in the box score when they played Portland State the week prior. Um, I I think that this is uh this relatively average or below average or below Dicker era standard defense for Wazoo isn't all that surprising after I've been kind of keeping tabs on Wazoo and kind of their situation during the offseason where kind of similar to us but on a different type of level. They have played really well the last 2 years, in large part because they had good players that stuck around and were experienced veterans. And now they're having to start cycling through more and more guys now that, some of those super seniors from the COVID era with the extra eligibility are kind of have now, filtered out of the roster. So I do think that this defense is a little bit more gettable than say last year's Wazoo unit that performed outstanding in the Apple Cup against an obviously generational Husky offense.
Yeah.
Holding them to, what was it, 24 points?
Yeah.
Even in a losing effort, but that was still a tremendous effort from Wazoo's defense. But I think it's also to the point where it's better for us to play to our strengths on offense rather than trying to hunt too much for Wazoo's weaknesses if it's not something that we're not really well suited for. Kind of like what I was saying earlier, we should try to run plays and lean on concepts that work for the offensive line, meshed with what Coleman's good at, which is quite a large number of things. A lot of mid zone, maybe a little bit of outside zone, maybe pair that up with some inside zone, some screens maybe here and there. And then also letting Will Rogers sit back and just sling the ball around. I think everybody, including myself, earlier or before the season started, had expectations of him transitioning from an air raid type of an offense into this more under center, more pro style offense. That it would be uncomfortable, but we would be able to lean that much more on play action from under center, X, Y, and Z, other things that have, the conventional wisdom is that they are benefiting a quarterback rather than forcing him to just make consistent drop back reads, full field reads, whatever, without some of those schematic aids. I think it's the other way around because, like, if you look at kind of the DeGraff touchdown this past week that I had mentioned earlier, if you look at that really nice throw to Boston on the post, if you look at there's one or two other plays that really stood out to me that were just simple drop back. He's reading the defense pre-snap. He kind of already knows where it needs to go, and then he won with placement, accuracy. He did show off some zip, and just he looked way more comfortable than operating under center and running bootlegs and play action and all that other sorts of stuff. I think we just got to let him play to his game.
I like that idea. My one final request for this Apple Cup is every time we make a big play, to play the audio clip over the PA from the presidential debate of "they're eating the cats" over and over through the game. Before we wrap up, just do a quick lightning round on some of the other news from around the Big Ten and the Pacific Northwest. Oregon barely escaped Boise with 2 punt return touchdowns and another long punt return that led to a touchdown. Now they have to play on the road against Oregon State. Either of you think Oregon State, the Pac-12 survivor, Pac-2 survivor, has a chance in this one?
I'll give them a chance. I have less confidence in them just because they don't have what's that guy's name? That stud running back from last year.
Martinez.
Yeah. he's not on the team anymore, right?
No, he's at Michigan
That's
or
with
Miami
Miami.
now. Yeah, he went with Cam Ward.
Yeah, if he was still there, I'd say, ooh, that would have been a second dose of like Ash and Genty right there.
Yeah.
Boise's running back looked phenomenal against Oregon.
Yes. He looked phenomenal in the game where he didn't have 6 rushing touchdowns. So yeah, he's off to a pretty good start this year. It's been last week was a rough week for a lot of the teams on UW's schedule. Texas just obliterated Michigan, made that look like a game that UW should definitely have a chance in. They have real quarterback problems. Iowa lost to Iowa State at the gun on a 58-yard field goal by a walk-on freshman kicker, which for the Cyclones, which is interesting. Penn State had its hands full against Bowling Green, didn't really pull that one out until late. The schedule is looking a little bit more favorable than it might have, although this is 1 week. Things can obviously change drastically. But Luke, did any of these Big Ten teams really make an impression on you for better or worse from week 2?
Well, I mean, week 2 was just a rough week for any AP ranked team. I swear.
Yeah.
Even the ones that did come out and win, like Oklahoma State, didn't they have to go to double overtime? No, it was Kansas State had to go to double overtime to win. Oklahoma State had to come back and win.
Yeah.
A lot of AP teams had to come back and actually win their games. So one that did obviously deserved to be ranked for that reason because they had the toughness to continue through. But unfortunately for Michigan, I saw this one coming a mile away. That's one of the only ones I felt really confident that Texas was going to handily take care of them. And I only needed to see one touchdown drive by Texas to know for sure that it was not going to be a good day for Michigan. And this is not the Michigan team we know, period. I'm not talking last year's championship game. I'm talking Michigan for the entire Harbaugh era. I mean, the championship game is a perfect example of it, which is they were just so technically sound on defense. I mean, our offense was very, very talented last year, but I don't think I can remember a single missed tackle in that championship game by the Michigan defense. I saw an average of 2 per play on that one particular drive by
130 missed tackles. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's where I knew that with how much talent is on that Texas roster and the technical issues that Michigan was having, that it was probably going to be a long day for them. And unfortunately for them, it was. I actually did a really long write-up in an article earlier today talking about Michigan's quarterback issues, and it is not pretty. And I wouldn't be surprised if Orji, their backup quarterback, who is a very explosive runner, got more play moving forward as well.
Yeah, not much of a passer, but he does one thing extremely well, which is probably more than you can say for Warren so far. Let's finish up there. We're going to go into our recommendations and plugs. Coach, anything you want to start with? Any updates on the Lincoln Lynx?
Yeah. Well, they had their season opener this past week against Mercer Island. Mercer Island, lots, Lynx, much less than lots. We won't go into the details there. Might be a long season yet again, but then again, 1 game sample size. We never know. But the Lynx do pick up. They have their second game of the season again. I believe non-conference this Friday, this week, Friday, 7 p.m. at Ingram. They are playing Lakeside, who they've played pretty consistently over the last couple of years. I say that as if the last couple of years weren't 75% of their entire existence. But we do have a winning record against them, so hopefully it's more even competition. We look a little bit better. Hopefully things turn out our way and it's not quite as miserable of a game as it has been the last couple of times. I went to a game at Ingram where we just got dumped on and almost struck by lightning. So I don't think the weather's looking that bad for this weekend.
Lucky. That should be better, at least for the people going to the game. Luke, anything you want to recommend this week?
Yes, I have. It's a rewatch for me, but my wife has not seen Arrested Development before,
Oh,
and she is absolutely loving it, which makes me very happy because my hot take is that Arrested Development is funnier than The Office, and that upsets quite a few people whenever I tell them that. But there, it kind of walked so The Office could run, so to speak, and with the camera style. And I mean, it is just such a sharp and hilarious show, especially the original 3 seasons. Jokes just fly a mile a minute, and it also has this an incredible cast that gels so well together. So if you
yeah.
haven't seen it before, I couldn't recommend that one enough. And if you haven't seen it in a while, probably worth the rewatch.
Yes, I 100% agree. The reboots didn't really work, but yeah, the original 3 seasons were
Yes.
a lot
So
funnier than The Office.
for the reboot seasons, when they originally aired them, they completely abandoned the style that they had done in the first 3 seasons. So they changed it to do one episode was only for one character. Then they
Right,
realized their
yeah.
mistake and they completely remixed it and made it more traditional to the first 3 seasons. And it's a lot more watchable for me this time.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, maybe I should go back and watch that one again. I know they had trouble getting the actors in the same place at the same time when they made that series, the season 4, and that was one of the reasons that the characters weren't overlapping as much as they usually did. Anyway, I was just going to suggest a show called Eric on Netflix. It's a mini series starring Benedict Cumberbatch and Gabby Hoffman. It's about a missing child, like a marriage kind of disintegrating, and the child getting abducted. It's 6 episodes. Each one's about 45 minutes. It's set in 1970s New York, which is a very cool setting to me. I think it adds a lot to it, but very interesting, good, tense, suspenseful series. Not super long. You could probably knock it out over the course of 2 nights, but pretty good. I recommend it. Anyway, we're out of time. We're not going to have time for Cody Pickett this week, but hopefully he'll be around next week to talk about a glorious Apple Cup triumph. In the meantime, thanks for listening and go Dogs.
Go Dogs.
Go Dogs.